we have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
This is Multipolarity, charting the rise of the new multipolar world order. Coming up this week,
Narendra Modi in Shanghai in the back of a car with Vladimir Putin positively glowing.
the tweets the Indians sent out at the Shanghai Co-Operation Organisation were the equivalent of a taken-for-granted girlfriend openly flirting with the jocks at the big keg party. The key question: is this obvious piece of signalling going to be stronger than the thick skulls of the lugs in Washington?
Meanwhile, in Venezuela, US destroyers are patrolling the coastline, ostensibly to stop cartel shipments. Are they about to make a Noriega of Maduro?
Finally, in Britain, the bond yield has hit a 30-year high. At the same time, France can't pass a budget and has 114% debt to GDP. What's going to happen when two of Europe's big three economies both try to squeeze through the door of the IMF at the same time?
All this and more in an hour and a quarter of Super Soaraway subscriber special. That's right, it's that time of the month. Time to put down $5, pounds, euros to get to eavesdrop with your fellow subscribers in the secret Multipolarity Green Room.
Go to Patreon, search Multipolarity, slap down your cash, and get backstage where the real action is.
But first, Shanghai surprise.
The big geopolitical news this week has been the 25th meeting of the Shanghai Co-Operation Organisation. That is a Eurasian organisation that discusses military, economic and security affairs within its member nations, which include primarily India, Russia, China and the Central Asian nations. This meeting was absolutely huge, though, and I think it's fair to say has been a massive coup for Xi Jinping in China. We had a huge number of deals and agreements that were signed, including one between the Russian Federation and China, which primarily, or in the most headline-grabbing way, included finally the agreement to construct the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, which will go from the Arctic north of Russia all the way through the country, through Mongolia and into China, as well as an agreement to increase the flow through the Power of Siberia 1 pipeline. So this means finally Russia has likely been able to redirect a big chunk of the gas that had been going to the European Union, and now China will get that cheap pipeline gas. Russia seems happy because it's a 30-year deal and they get a consistent, predictable sale, and China is happy because it's very cheap and very reliable. But I think it's fair to say that the biggest news, listeners, and also Philip Pilkington, has been the attendance of Prime Minister Modi of India, and a serious attempt at détente between India and the People's Republic of China. Of course, they've had certain geopolitical issues related to the Himalayan area and the Nepal area and Tibet, also water security over the years. They've even gone to war farther in the past, I should add, in the 1950s. But in general, they've had a fractious agreement, and this is the kind of final public display of rapprochement and détente and all of those French-sounding diplomatic words. And I think that Modi has used this to send a very clear message to the United States primarily that, look, you've pushed us away. We're going to ignore these tariffs. We're not going to bow to you. And in fact, what we're doing now is we're going to shift a little bit closer to the Chinese. I think from the Indian perspective, that makes a lot of sense economically. It gives them access to some of the technology and materials that they'll need to not become completely reliant in terms of tech and social media and the like, and AI on the US. It also gives them great trading and manufacturing opportunities. And in terms of security, it's obviously incredibly important as well. I wonder whether this is a message that has been received in Washington. Modi, in terms of his tweets, hanging out with Putin, saying what a pleasure it is to meet Vladimir Putin, how it's always a pleasure, and then bringing Putin and Xi together and linking arms with them. I mean, this is truly the diplomatic equivalent of speaking loudly and slowly to somebody that you think isn't the brightest person in the world. But have Washington got the message, I wonder? Either way, this has been a momentous Shanghai Co-Operation Organisation meeting, Philip Pilkington.
Yeah, I think it's strangely the event where I think the West is beginning to wake up to the realities of what the New World Order is going to look like. I think the reason for that is, well, it's twofold. First of all, as you said, it was an enormous event. I don't think anyone really saw coming how big an event it was. We didn't. At least I didn't. Maybe you knew. I didn't. I thought it would be another SCO. I suppose if we thought about it a bit harder and said, well, this India thing's going on, maybe it wouldn't have been. But it wasn't just the India thing. It was all these deals and new events happening in diplomatic space all around the sidelines of this thing. They even announced an SCO-related bank, showing that the SCO is now kind of joining hands with the BRICS, which is just something, you know, even the wildest hosts of Multipolarity, the podcast, wouldn't have said was very likely even a year ago. So these changes are enormous, but I think it was basically the India situation that started to cause the West to wake up to what's actually going on in the world. I think we've seen quite a lot of that on Twitter, not just among kind of conservative types around the Trump movement and so on, the ones interested in foreign policy. Of course, a lot of the Trump movement isn't that interested in foreign policy, except for, like, we don't want any more of that, basically, by which they mean wars and so on. The ones that are interested in foreign policy, you certainly saw a reaction from them. A reaction that I would say you have not seen with previous kind of flubs or mistakes in the Trump platform so far. There's been numerous mistakes. We've documented them on Multipolarity, but I think the foreign policy Trump crowd has kind of hung together and they've powered through, and the India thing just, I think it was a little bit of a step too far. It was just so obviously an unforced error. It was just such a huge mistake. We've been warning about it for weeks, obviously, but I think when they saw the actual reality of what happened with the sanctions the secondary sanctions that Trump put on India, I think they started to wake up pretty fast. And the kind of more liberal media too, I think, started to realize that something was going on. I think the liberal, foreign policy media, by which I don't mean specialist publications like Foreign Policy and so on. I mean like newspapers like the Financial Times or something that would cover foreign policy more generally and have kind of a sketchy understanding of it, but, some understanding. I think they all realized that India was an important card in the Western deck. I've always thought, actually, that those people have overestimated how much power or how much friendship there is between the West and India. But, in their mind, it was like the ally in that region, and that was never really true. But they thought of it like that. So what happened at the SCO, I think, shocked them in that way too. And so it's giving rise to this more general, it's kind of like it happens often in these political situations where there's an awful lot of basically pent up delusion, and you finally like uncork the bottle and it just all starts to flow out. We see this from time to time. Actually, we've seen it quite a few times in the past few years. I'll just give an example that I saw. The newspapers have been covering pretty extensively, the Washington Post, Financial Times and so on, that Xi Jinping, at a meeting, I think, with Putin, certainly he said it at a meeting with another more junior government official, but I think I saw that he also said it at a meeting with Putin. He started to emphasize the role that China and Russia played in the Second World War. And the way it was kind of presented was that China was the main power in the Pacific theater in the war against Japan, and Russia, or the Soviet Union, was the main player in the Europe theater. And there's actually a lot of truth to this if you want to just take it in terms of, resources deployed, casualties incurred, and so on. But the truth or falsity, I suppose, doesn't matter that much. It's the very fact that they're framing the Second World War in that way. And I saw a very visceral from the reaction from the Western media, very confused. that you could actually portray global events in a slightly different way. That you could say, well, here's our narrative of what happened in the Second World War. And it's a pretty accurate narrative, actually. I mean, from their perspective. People found that shocking, and I think it really spoke to a narcissism in the West. Because, just to play devil's advocate a little bit, we in the West, we mainly think about the British and American intervention in Europe, and the American intervention in the Pacific. It's much more rare that people talk about the role of the Soviet Union, but there's some sense of it because they understand that the Soviet Union met the Allies in Germany. Almost never talk about the Chinese experience of the war in the West. I mean, most people probably have only heard of some of the human rights abuses that the Japanese engaged on the Chinese continent. They don't really think about the fact the Maoist movement, the Chinese Communist movement, and so on grew up in that war. They don't know the history of it. So, I think it's the fact that was being discussed in such an explicit way at the same time as this person that popularly in the Western press is seen as a core ally and a balancing force against China and Russia was at the SCO. I think it just really kicked a lot of Westerners in the pants and made them realize, like, whoa, the world could actually look fundamentally different by 2030, and we could really lose our place in it. We could be written out of the history books to a large extent for most of the population in the world. We could find ourselves with basically no allies in the East. They're starting to realize that now. I mean, we've realized it since we started the podcast, but I think that SCO is the moment that the West actually began to wake up. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens next. Will they actually begin trying to take lessons?
Hello there, this is Andy Collingwood. You're at the paywall. Do you want to go over it? You know you can climb over the paywall, right? Whatever's on the other side is just seconds away. Go to patreon.com, enter a few quick details, pay the 5 currency units, get the episode, become a part of secret Multipolarity. Of course, if you're already in the club, the show continues just beyond. If not, for now, goodbye.
That's bad for the Trump administration. People at State Department will have the knives out for them now because they've actually interfered with a serious alliance that's been there for a very long time, or quasi alliance, or whatever you want to call it. So